Now, remember the formerly known as Capitol Hill. Then, of course, it became CHAZ. Then it became CHOP, which is this Summer of Love festival allegedly, where lunatics have taken over 6 city blocks inside a city, within a state, within a country. Well, guess what happened on the weekend? Somebody got shot and killed there in this supposedly Summer of Love area. Yet still, no movement from the authorities in Seattle to try to take this thing back. Every time I click onto the American cable channels that we get here, it really is only Fox that's still talking about whether this thing even exists, let alone anything else. It is incredible that even after somebody is shot and killed in celebrations that turned into something worse, that's not the impetus to clean this joint out.
Well, and there was a further shooting overnight. I mean, we're, 8 a.m. here in DC, and there was another shooting overnight. And the worst part about it, Paul, is that when the shooting occurred and the ambulances wanted to get into that so-called protected zone, the community stopped the ambulances, so they called the police, and then they stopped the police getting in to secure it for the ambulances. Now, this is just total lawlessness, and somehow the mayor thinks that this is acceptable. In fact, some of the councillors were suggesting there was some sort of right-wing inspired violence, but the person who was broadcasting on Facebook Live from the scene, why they're doing that, God knows, but they're doing it. Even they suggested, no, there was a dispute between individuals. Now, Washington State has some, pretty strict gun laws. You need to be licensed in order to carry a gun in Washington State. But the fact is that the violence is part and parcel of most American cities. And gun violence is writ large. And you need the police to protect the community. It's as simple as that. And, the sanctimonious attitude of some people suggesting that you really don't need to have a police force patrolling the streets, protecting the people, is absurd. And sooner or later, someone has got to call these people out. And I think it's a very strong line for Donald Trump in his speech on Saturday night. He ran really hard on personal security and national security. And, as I've said before to you, Paul, if you're going to swing back those independent voters, and particularly the suburban mums, white mums that were instrumental in Donald Trump beating Hillary Clinton, I think the obvious way for Donald Trump to do it is law and order and running hard on security. And every day, those people will vote for their personal security and their job security ahead of voting for someone who they believe is just not Donald Trump.
No, agree completely. Final one, John Bolton, the mustachioed man who at one point was on the fringes of the George W. Bush, in fact couldn't even get Senate confirmation to become the UN ambassador under George W. Bush. He ends up coming back as the National Security Advisor to Donald Trump, doesn't step up to give evidence at a time when presumably the consequences of his evidence could have been the impeachment of the president, instead holds it all back for a book. And amazingly, even Democrats were out on television saying, look, we don't care. We don't care what he's got to say. We're not going to start new investigations. And the 1 hour interview that he did on American television is basically a flop with no one really talking about it the day after.
Well, and to add to his woes, the book was just released on Twitter. So the online version of the book. So look, John Bolton, I had quite a bit to do with him. He's a sort of angry man. He was, he wanted basically to invade North Korea, invade Iran. He said it publicly. It's ironic that he thinks he'd find a safe haven amongst Democrats, because they certainly didn't agree with that strategy either. And he, by behaving this way, I think he's quite discredited. And there may be some truth to some of the things he says, but some of it was very public. When Donald Trump said, I'd like China to help me to win the next election, Donald Trump said it in front of a whole host of TV cameras. The one thing about Donald Trump I can say to you is he really isn't discreet about these things. He said, you know, before the last election, he said, you know, I invite the Russians to come in and help me win the election and get rid of Hillary Clinton. I mean, he said it on TV. Why is it any surprise? He says everything publicly. He's entirely transparent. So when you know, there's some secret agenda in relation to Donald Trump inviting the Chinese to help him win the election, he said it in front of every television camera that was available at the time, and it was widely reported. So, you know, it's just any opportunity to make a buck, you know, someone will do it. Some of my friends that have left the White House have been offered a huge amount of money to publish a tell-all book. And they say, why? You know, because everything's out there. So, you know, there's nothing sinister about any of this.
Yeah, there's nothing secret, literally. You know, unless you want to know what he had for dinner,
No.
there's nothing else is known. Nothing else is secret. BondoPartners.com is where you can find more about what Joe's doing in the US. In the meantime, we'll check back in with him next week. All the best to you and the family, mate.